as you know, this is a talented and timely panel. We are supposed to discuss the Republican presidential primary, the Democratic presidential primary in New York State, and then other Super Tuesday states, but there are quite a few independent souls here, so what they do with the program, we'll all wait and see. Please stay afterwards for a wine, cheese, and political buzz reception, and you can enjoy this lovely exhibit, which comes to us from Provincetown, Massachusetts. Let me introduce the panelists. Starting on your left is Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist Institute for Public Opinion. Lee is Vice President of the National Council of Public Polls and is a well-known, pithy commentator on politics and on polling. Very pithy. Next to him is Mickey Blum, Principal in Blum and Weprin Associates, a firm which produces polls and on a regular basis for the Daily News, New York One, and the Dallas Morning News. She previously was part of the political unit at NBC News. And next to her is Doug Muzzio, Professor of Public Affairs at Baruch College, a polling and a tiger in the classroom, let me tell you, a polling and political analyst for ABC News and WABC TV. Joining us as we proceed will be Mickey Carroll, who's director of the Quinnipiac College poll and for many years reported on the New York political scene for the New York Times and for Newsday. So without taking any more time, let me turn this over to Doug Muzzio.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks to the National Arts Club, thanks to my colleagues, thanks to the Baruch School of Public Affairs. I welcome all you political junkies and civic leaders. In December, when I called up my three friends and said, let's do it again, we had done it once in October of '98 prior to the U.S. Senate race in 1998. This election was going to be a snooze. It was going to be Bush and Gore. We were going to sleep through it, go into deep coma during the general election. Maybe Bradley was going to provide some excitement, but the Republican primary, forget about it. It wasn't going to be interesting at all. In fact, as it's turned out, next Tuesday's primary, particularly the Republican primary, is historic. It's historic in several senses. Number one, we never had a Republican presidential primary, much to Governor Pataki and candidate Bush's chagrin. Also, New York will be pivotal for the first time in a long time. Moving the primary up was a stroke of genius in terms of New York's impact on a national election. And thirdly, it's historic for us academics because we might be seeing the beginnings of a political realignment in the United States. We'll leave that to, you know, the later numbers crunchers. The ground rules, not many. With this crew, you don't need ground rules. I'll moderate, referee. That's right. That's nobody, anyway. What we intend to do is, oh, perfect. Just Mr. Carroll, just on, from Hamden, Connecticut.
Just on kill.
We already introduced you in that sense.
Thank you. Hey, this is good.
I think
I just got to say, we took a poll some time ago and found people were satisfied with subway service in New York.
And
I'm in the minority.
Okay. New data from Mickey Carroll. We'll start with the Republican primary. What we'll do is we'll open it up to each of us for 3 to 5 minutes. Lee will begin. He's got a new poll out today, so we'll have some fresh numbers. Then I've asked Mickey Blum to talk about who's going to be voting on Tuesday. Mickey Carroll, I would like to talk about Catholics, gender gaps, whatever Mickey wants to talk about, because that's what he'll do. And then what I'll do is I'll briefly set the context by looking at the Republican electorates in the previous primary states by looking at exit polls. Then open it up to you folks to talk about the Republican primary. Then when we've exhausted ourselves doing that, or within 45 minutes to an hour by the clock, because we're getting out of here no later than 2:45, no matter what, then there's wine and cheese afterwards. Then we'll do the Democratic presidential primary, which may be, you know, a Bradley obit, how did it fail? And then turn very briefly to the other Super Tuesday primary states. Now, if you look at your packets, what you see on the right-hand side are the latest polling from Lee, from Mickey, from both the Times, the Post, I've got some stuff from ABC National News on McCain, as well as the Ohio poll and the Los Angeles Times poll. So I figured a good professor hands out materials, handouts to take home, you've got it. Okay, without any further discussion, Lee, why don't we just turn it over to you?
I wonder if, Mickey, would you rather be pithy or tigeresque?
Which?
You have a choice between being pithy or as a tiger. That's what we've been described as.
Geez, I'll pass.
Raconteur? Okay, go ahead, Ray.
Okay, thanks, Doug. It's good that Doug does this because it gives us a chance. All of us talk on the phones a lot, but we never get a chance to actually, be in the same place together. So it's very nice that, Doug, you do this, and thank you all for coming. The latest poll that we have out, let me talk a little bit about that and maybe a few comments on some things about which way it's going. Doug did say that this is a historic time in New York for a Republican, for having the kind of competitive Republican primary that we do have. And what's interesting, I guess, about it is, you've been hearing about open and closed primaries, and you may not know that New York is actually an open primary on the Republican side because it's the first time they're allowing more than one candidate on the ballot.
It's no longer Stalinist Russia.
That's right. So we've changed entirely on that. Anyway, so what we're seeing in our numbers is that now, after months of Bush having a very wide lead and following New Hampshire, McCain starting to close, and then as of the beginning of this week, the whole thing getting very tight and slightly edging even McCain's way by midweek. It seems that now, as things are with a volatile electorate, things are now moving a little bit more Bush's way, such that it's about as close as it can get in the numbers, but the old guess is that it may be beginning to trend his way a little bit, and if that's the case, then one of McCain's few places where he can punch through may no longer be his, although it still could go the other way. We'll talk about that later. The numbers are within the error margin for those of you who like that kind of stuff. Clearly, Bush does much better among conservative Republicans, who are the lion's share of the voters here on the Republican side. He does better among women. Women are the most undecided of the electorate, and that's why you're seeing lots of ads now on breast cancer and environment and alike. Women are being sought after. McCain does better among male voters, more moderate voters, and we're seeing a sense that in the beginning of the week, where Bush was being largely blamed for having injected a lot of religion into politics, with coming off of what we call the reverse bounce from South Carolina, where he won the South Carolina primary but actually hurt himself in places like Michigan and New York at the same time because of what was going on in South Carolina. It seems that McCain, bit for the tease and got in and started slinging with them and somewhat damaged his own image. And right now, New Yorkers are fairly evenly divided as to who is pushing the religion and politics issue. To McCain's discredit, he came on the scene as the Straight Talk Express, and his appeal in many ways is not to be at the level of slinging it back and forth that Bush has been doing and trying to bring McCain back down to earth. And in the process, McCain has got himself off issues, off of campaign finance reform, off of Social Security, and is now fighting on a daily basis, one release versus the other, to try to get a little leverage. As the thing seems to be going away from him, not just in New York, but in the rest of the nation, which we're going to talk about in the end. I don't think you want me to talk about the Democrats right now.
No.
Okay, but I will. Let me just end by saying, just as a general introduction to the discussion today, that the turnout on primaries is always very crucial, and this is no exception. You've got two different sets of figures here. You've got McCain supporters who are more intensely committed to him versus the more established organizational strength of Pataki/Giuliani and the get out the vote of local known people on the ballot. When you go on the ballot on the Republican side, you're not voting in a popular contest for McCain or Bush. You're voting for delegates who are pledged to those people, those candidates, and the names of the Bush people are all your well-known local Republicans who you've been voting for if you're a Republican year after year after year, and the McCain people are relative unknowns. So there may be that factor as well affecting people when they actually go in the ballot box. So the turnout at its lowest number is beneficial more to McCain. My sense, though, is that it's going to have, with the kinds of things that have been going on Republicans nationally and seem to be just beginning in New York, with both candidates here today and tomorrow, that the turnout is not going to be at that rock bottom level. And if that's the case, then that also will benefit. It'll get some more of the middle turnout types on the Republican side, and that will infuse the general recipe with more Bush people. So anyway, it's still very close. You can tell from the way I'm talking, it seems to be right now, moving a little bit Bush's way, but the numbers right now are about as close as they could be. You want me to pause right there, and then we can
good,
pick it up
thank
later?
you.
Okay, Mickey.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about who is the Republican likely voter, and I think basically, which maybe you could sort of tell from what Lee was saying, we don't really know who the Republican likely voter is. But if George W. Bush said he could fake it, I guess we can too. So here we are, and this is a year in which Republicans have sort of defied all expectations all over the country, and there have been record turnouts, and there have been a lot of first-time primary voters. And so there have been lots of surprises, and week to week, it's been a sort of contrary kind of electorate. We've gotten one of them's built up momentum, and then it's been quickly knocked down the next week by the next contest in the next state. So, and each state has then seen itself as being very important, and it's brought out, record turnout. So it has been hard all over, but it's really even harder in New York because it is really the first contested statewide Republican primary in a generation. It's not since Javits and D'Amato, and that was a Senate election. I mean, in '96, the Dole primary was completely different from this. It was really a foregone conclusion by then, and Buchanan wasn't even on the ballot in a lot of places, and Forbes really wasn't that much of a factor. So we really have nothing to compare this to, and no way to really look at the, to know what the electorate will look like. And this is very different for us as pollsters. I mean, normally we really know, we have elections that we compare things to, and we feel pretty confident about where the electorate's going to show up more, and and what they're going to look like. And this one is a lot harder for all of us, and it is a lot less certain. Moreover, registered Republicans just aren't easy to poll to begin with, because not all adults are registered voters, and even of those, only a little over a quarter of the registered voters in this state are registered Republicans. And as Lee said, this is a closed primary. Only the registered Republicans can vote. So they're kind of it's a small group. They're hard to find. We still then have to narrow them down to likelies. And so this has not been an easy thing, and given that as a background, it shouldn't be terribly surprising that in the last week we've had a very wide range of pre-primary polls. We've gone all the way from the CBS and the New York Times having 10 points Bush to earlier in the week both the Marist and the Quinnipiac polls being about 7 points McCain, and now it's back to was it 1 point? 1 point Bush. And so, we've seen, so not only is it volatile, but it's really been a very hard group, and we've all had sort of very sort of small samples and
But the error margins
with large margins of error.
But the error margins are plus or minus 20. I think
That's right, exactly.
you're looking at
Makes it easy.
That's right. So we're all within margin of error,
can
even
still
though
win
we
this?
have this 20-point range here, because they're all sort of small. And now, and you may have noticed that I didn't give you any of mine. So with full disclosure, I'll tell you that our last published poll was about 3 weeks ago, which is why we hadn't really talked about it, because that's already a long, in this primary season, that is a long time ago, and we had Bush by 12 at that time. We are going to be coming out with one this weekend, but I'm not about to scoop my client. So we're coming out with one for New York One and the Daily News this weekend, so you'll have to tune in to find out and read the Sunday Daily News to find out how that goes. What we all agree on, and how we've sort of all proceeded in looking at this race. Well, basically all except for Zogby, and I should mention that he also has a new poll out today, which I think is either 3 or 4 points Bush. But all except for him. We all start with RDD, random digit dial samples. We all screen for registered voters, then for registered Republicans, and from there we try to sort out the likelies. What do we know about registered Republicans or likelies? Well, the only thing we know that's absolutely true about registered Republicans are how they're registered by county and therefore by region. So we know that 54% of them are upstate, 29% of them in the burbs, and about 17% of them in the city. But there's a lot of other things we at least think we know and that we certainly agree on about their likely Republican voter. More than 90% of them are white, somewhere around 92%. More than 50% are male. Our range in our polls is about from 55 to 58% male. About half are Catholic. The range goes from, again, within our polls from, I think, 46 to 55% Catholic. But about half Catholic, about 35 to 40% Protestant, maybe 5 or 6% Jewish. The Protestants here are different kind of Protestants than we've seen in some other parts of the country, certainly different from the South. This is mainstream Protestants, not fundamentalist. This is not Pat Robertson country. It's not the religious right. It's a much more mainstream Protestant. It's a very educated group. Less than a quarter of the Republican voters have no college. Maybe about 45% or so have at least a bachelor's degree. We talk about the Republicans as the party of the rich. In New York, it is. About half or so, you know, again, going looking at all of our polls, about half make more than $50,000. It's kind of split, moderate and conservative, slightly more conservative than moderate, but conservative means something different here than it means in the rest of the country. The conservatives here are sort of fiscal law and order conservatives. It's not that social religious conservative that you see in other places. There's some question, and Lee and I have talked about this a lot, whether Rockefeller Republicans still exist in New York. I don't know that Rockefeller Republicans still exist in New York. I think we have a sort of more modern version of the sort of Pataki-Giuliani Republican, which is considered to be more moderate on social issues, and again, more of that sort of law and order and fiscal Republican, but they're pro-choice and they're more moderate on some social issues. When we all came down to trying to figure out what was a likely voter, we somewhat split in terms of how large we thought the turnout was going to be, and therefore how sort of tight or loose we made our likely voter screens. So I know that Quinnipiac, for example, has a much tighter screen than we did, expecting a lower turnout and therefore sort of tightening their screen. We, I think, based on the record turnout everywhere, left our screen a little looser and allowed people to sort of tell us more for themselves whether they really thought that they were very likely. We're basically, on some level at least, all using the voters' own assessment of how much they care about this, how interested they are, and whether you know they tell us that they're really intending to vote, because there really is no past behavior that makes any sense for this election. Because it's like nothing else, we don't have that to go on. All of that said, you know, it's still all about turnout. It always is. We don't really know whether it's going to turn out more in one area, more in another. What are we looking for? Clearly, McCain is looking for the Catholic turnout. He's looking for the people excited by the challenger. He may get that for the moderate and pro-choice, the suburbs to turn out. Bush is obviously counting on the organization, the delegate names on the ballot, the TV ads he has going. Upstate turns out it's Bush. The burbs turn out it's McCain. And it could be either.
Yeah, I was just gonna, if I could just jump in on one thing. Because we're talking about the Republican primary, I want people to know that there is no winner or loser in the New York Republican primary because there is no popular vote. Right. And I think that's important.
Oh, that's true.
We're gonna go from the pre-election polls to the exit polls, and we may skip the voters in the middle. I mean, because, after all, that sort of covers it for all of us. But, so there will be votes for delegates and candidates pledged to delegates, but it's very confusing.
confusing.
And on election night, there will not be, 2.6 million for one and 400,000 for the other, like you're used to seeing sometimes.
Right.
It won't be there. It'll be delegates
Right,
pledged.
and it is hard, and some of the confusion about the delegate names on the ballots, they will see the more familiar names, certainly for Bush, and it will be in the interest of some of those delegates, some of those party officials and elected officials and leaders to be getting out that vote, because it matters to them. They're trying to get elected as delegates. And so they're promoting themselves as well. On the other hand, I think that traditionally we don't really think that that's what makes the big difference. It might, with some delegates, there might be a couple where you go and you vote for that one because he is somebody who matters to you, or or he's your congressman or something, but I don't think that it would necessarily swing you over to all of the delegates for that candidate if you weren't for that candidate.
Essentially, you have 31 elections in the 31 CDs in New York. There's
Right.
not one statewide election, and which gives opportunities for picking up pieces of the vote so they could both say they won something or lost something, right? I turn it to my esteemed colleague, Mickey Carroll.
Well, I think Doug wanted me to talk essentially about Catholics, which I am one of.
Me
So I
too,
guess
thank you.
that's
That's why I picked it.
But I know half this crowd. You know more about this than we do, most of you. So anyway, let me tell you a couple of things.
Go ahead.
I don't know a lot about Catholics.
What we do on this side.
This is the Catholic side of the table. Yeah. All the polls measured Catholics ever so slightly differently. We have them at just under 50% of the Republican Party. The Times, I think, has them down at 46. But you can say essentially that Catholics are about half of the Republican Party. Not only are New York Republicans different, New York Republican Catholics are different. Republicans upstate are like my mother, they're WASPs. Republicans down here tend to be, once you get away from Roy Goodman's crowd, tend to be Italian. And historically, you know why that is, that the Irish, my guys, when Tammany Hall was running the Democratic Party and the Italians
my
came
guys
over,
out.
they wouldn't let them in.
Thank you.
They didn't want to, you see it in the Catholic Church and you see it in the Democratic Party. Lee, have you finished? Is that your last poll?
No, we're still.
You're doing one, okay.
yeah.
When Mickey,
Right,
Mickey is going to do one in the Daily News, I guess, on Sunday. We're doing one through Sunday, which you'll be able to hear about on Monday morning. And frankly, I don't have any idea the way it's going to go. Our last poll, which we completed on Monday, showed McCain up by 7. But there's a couple of things. First, and I'll talk about Catholics in a second. First, there's absolutely no track record.
Right.
Republicans in New York are not accustomed to voting in primaries, and not only that, Republican officials are not accustomed to turning people out for primaries. They have, but Mickey's point about who's on the listed as delegates. Yes, it'll be nice, obviously, to have Senator so-and-so against anonymous somebody else. But the other thing is this, just think about this, that in each of these districts, the people listed as delegates, and Bush got in early, has heavy hitters, they don't want to lose. So they're going to be working, sure, they'll be working very hard for George Bush, but they're also going to be working very hard for themselves. Because I'm sure that there's no political celebrity who wants to lose to some political nonentity, Catholics. The last Quinnipiac poll showed that Bush's favorability rating among Catholics had gone woof, down from about even the last time we did it. He was down about, 10, I didn't bring the thing along, 10, 13 points, something like that. But I would like to suggest the following, and and our numbers don't necessarily show it. There are any number of groups, ethnic, you name it, in the nation, in the state, that feel threatened, that feel that bigotry really annoys them if it's directed at them. I'm inclined to think that that's not as true among Catholics, at least Catholics in New York, as it would be among other groups. I was brought up on stories of, from my grandpa and my father about Al Smith, the Ku Klux Klan, the crosses, and I mean, that bothered them. And then remember when Kennedy ran, they were gonna have a telephone line from the Vatican to the White House? Come on. I don't think, and I have nothing statistically to establish this, but I don't think that Catholics feel particularly threatened. They're part of the mainstream. A friend of mine, a Democrat, who were never candidates, he specialized in noble losers. But they would come in, and, well, which we've had a lot of. But he'd sit them down and he'd say, who's the governor? Who's the senator? Who are the legislative leaders? Remember, it's a Catholic state, and it is a Catholic state. Governor Pataki, Senator Moynihan, we'll see what happens with the other one. Well, we saw Schumer, we'll see what happens with that thing. 3 of the legislative leaders, so the Catholic vote will matter, and I don't feel confident now in predicting how it's going to go. As a matter of fact, I don't feel confident in predicting how anything's going to go. I think we had McCain up by 7. Lee has McCain up now by 1, which is...
No, Bush by 1.
Bush up by 1, okay. Up by 1
We were
is not
7.
up, you know,
We were
but-
7 when you were 7.
Yeah,
so-
okay, yeah. So we'll simply have to see. And,
But your point, Mickey, if I could just interrupt, your
Sure,
point's
please,
well
sure.
taken, because it was this time 2 years ago, we were all gathered, and we were all criticizing then Congressman Schumer for running a lousy campaign against D'Amato, and how he wasn't responding to the charge that he wasn't showing up for work and all that stuff. Across town, D'Amato was calling him a putz at the time we were meeting.
Exactly as we were doing this.
well, D'Amato's
And
big
it changed
mistake, I
things
think,
overnight.
was grammatical. He called him a putz head. There is no such thing. Has anybody ever heard that? Everybody's called somebody a putz, but a putz head?
English
The guy didn't know
teachers
the
bottomed
language.
out on
And
Showed that he didn't really know.
anyway, also, my recollection is that when we did that 2 years ago, practically everything all of us said was wrong.
That's right.
Right?
That's right, absolutely.
So,
Well, not all of it, some of it.
What did I
Most
say
of it.
earlier about how we fake it? Or
anyway, period. We'll have numbers, Mickey will have numbers on Sunday, which I expect you'll stop tallying probably today, right?
Yeah,
We'll have numbers
tonight
on
is
Monday,
the
which
last
we'll
night.
stop tallying on Sunday night. But this thing has been so incredibly volatile. And I think that any pollster works off, any pollster, any politician works off previous patterns. There is no Republican
That's it.
pattern. D'Amato, Javits, come on.
No,
And I'm-
that's it.
Senate.
That's
Yes,
it. It
I
was
know.
the Senate
At least
20 years.
statewide.
That's 20
Right.
years
But,
ago.
no, Jeff, and I would argue that there has not been a meaningful Democratic statewide primary either.
There really hasn't.
The, what do you call it? No, Kennedy and Carter, I mean, stop and think. Kennedy and Carter was an exercise in ego by Kennedy. He knew he wasn't going to get nominated.
No.
So, in other words...
And that was also a generation ago.
Yeah, well, okay, but nonetheless, assuming that a race is between 2 people who have a shot, he didn't have a shot. And let me tell you one funny story. Okay,
Good.
Erastus Corning.
Of course we want a funny story. We want two
Erastus
funny
Corning, the
stories.
mayor of Albany, was it was the only county that was committed to Carter because Cuomo had talked him into it. And some of his people came to him and said, Mayor, we've had a county meeting, and some of the county committee wants to carry Kennedy petitions. And Corning said, it's a free country. Anybody can do whatever they want. The Kennedy petitions will be printed up. And he said, they'll be right on my desk for anybody to pick up. End of challenge, end of me. Okay.
Okay, just sort of to wrap it up, to put it in context, I just want to very quickly look at the exit poll results thus far and the actual voting thus far. If you aggregate the total vote that Bush has received and McCain has received thus far in the primaries, Bush has gotten 47% of the vote, McCain's gotten 46% of the vote. However, within this very close aggregate numbers, you've really got an extraordinarily divided Republican electorate in the Republican Party. You've got Bush on one hand being the candidate of self-described Republicans, conservatives, the religious right, and in terms of issues, those who are opposed to legal abortion, etc. Let's just go through the numbers a little bit. If you look at the party identification of those voters who have voted in Republican primaries, which were going to be different than New York, because after all, in New York, the Republican electorate will be registered Republicans, while in other states we had the capability of crossover. So in all the other states that we've exit polled, 6 states, 57% of the electorate were Republicans, 28 independents and 11% Democrats. And remember, in Michigan, Republicans made up a minority of Republican primary voters. That's not going to be the case. We're going to have 100% registered Republicans. Clearly, however, as Mickey, the Mickeys, if you will, and Lee have pointed out, this is not a normal, if you will, if one can talk about norms of what Republican electorates are. This is not the electorate that was the South Carolina electorate, nor was it the Virginia electorate, nor was it even the Michigan electorate, which is probably the closest to New York State. Now, in terms of that break, you've had Republicans going for Bush 2-1, 62-32. You've had independents going 66-27 for McCain, and Democrats 82-12 McCain. So you've got a really bifurcated electorate on that dimension.
Bifurcated.
Well, okay, that's right. But I mean, I'm talking about Bush has got one Republican, well, he's got Republican electorate, and McCain has another quote-unquote Republican primary electorate. Likewise, when you look at ideology, conservatives, who made up 53% of Republicans so far, 59% have been for Bush, 32 for McCain, 2-1. You look at moderates, it flips. 34% of the electorate has been moderates, 63% have gone for McCain, 33 for Bush. Democrats, 73, McCain, 22 Bush. So you've got a Republican conservative electorate on one side. Let me just do the religious right. And essentially how the VNS, which is the exit polling operation for the networks in the AP, they ask a specific question. They say, do you consider yourself a member of the political movement known as the religious right? And respondents answer that question yes or no. When you look at that, Bush wins overwhelmingly, has won overwhelmingly among the religious right. The last state that we had a vote was in Virginia, and McCain only got 14% of the religious right vote. Bush got 81. McCain has never gotten more than a quarter of the religious right. However, McCain has consistently won the non-religious right. Even in Virginia, he won the non-religious right 52-46, and in Michigan, he won 60% of the non-religious right. So what you've got is a picture here of a deeply split Republican electorate. And what you see also in other state polling for Super Tuesday, and looking down the road to the second Super Tuesday when we move south, you've got this real split. And as an academic, as I mentioned earlier, it is this split that leads one to believe that there's at least the potential for realignment here, that the Republican Party could, in a sense, fracture or fissure. You've got the Reform Party out there that's, in a sense, up for grabs. Very interesting election, particularly not only from a member of the chattering classes point of view, but from an academic's point of view as well. So in a sense, that gives you a flavor of where we're coming from, each of us in this. And I'd like to turn it over to the field, to the floor. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I was just thinking that there are some things that are, I agree with you that I think there's some real changes happening in the Republican Party and much more of that split happening. I think there's something interesting that's a little different here in the, at least that we've been noticing, which has, well, a couple of things. One has to do with the fact that there's a sort of general approval or of both of these candidates by most New York Republicans, and while you would expect with this kind of sort of split as a backdrop to it that there might be a lot of animosity on both sides, and at least here, I don't think we're seeing it. I mean, it's part of why maybe we're seeing this volatility. I don't know how deep the support is here for either side. I don't think either side hates the other candidate here that much. I don't know if that means that they're not, that they're going to be less motivated to show up, or whether there's just a lot more possibility of being won over to either side. But I think there's a little less of that, the religious wars that have been going on in other states, and maybe that kind of real anger that I think, and that maybe brought out a lot of vote in some of those states.
Just if I might, part of that I think was that you did have the crossovers. Those Republicans didn't all hate each other. They hated Democrats, and they hated,
Right.
or at least some of them
Yes.
did. And the also, except in a little tiny bit down south, the Republican Party that we saw on television impeaching President Clinton is really not only not the New York Republican Party, it's not the Northeast Republican Party. I don't think it's even the Republican Party hardly any place, except outside. Remember the Solid South when we were kids? It's still there, only now it's Republican.
Yeah, well, the Northeast, I mean, we're going to get on to that, I think, at some point, I mean, is much more McCain country at this point. I mean,
And the
the New
Republicans in
England.
New Hampshire,
Right.
way back when, in the New Hampshire primary, it seems like a
Right.
year ago, split pretty evenly between Bush and McCain,
Yeah, and let me
unlike
get also-
anywhere else.
And we're
just
seeing
the
it
whole,
in
but the Catholic
Massachusetts,
thing, I mean,
Connecticut.
you talk about Catholics, the look who gets elected in the Northeast when you get out of a district, when you get out of a neighborhood.
Oh, yeah, Governor Weld.
Well, sure, what you get is pro-choice Catholic Republicans. We got them in, we got one in New York, we got
New
one in
Jersey.
Connecticut, we got one in New Jersey, we got one in Pennsylvania, and I've forgotten where else you keep, but I mean, Pennsylvania's the most interesting one of all.
I'd
well,
just
that
like
was
to say that one of the things about the Republican Party that I think is also very interesting, I mean, if, on the assumption that Bush ends up the nominee, okay, let's just work on that, he's had to slice it far more to the right in the last month than he ever dreamed he would. Now, admittedly, Al Gore was going to run on suburban sprawl originally also, and had to sort of morph himself into Bill Bradley's position. Oh, yeah.
Right.
But he had to sort of
When was
morph
that?
into, mirror himself very tightly to Bradley's positions to eliminate any difference between them, and therefore any reason. But the one thing, I mean, that was being said here, that I don't know if it's going to work out down the road, although the Reform Party is an interesting sort of caveat in all this, is that the McCain and Bush Republicans are likely to become fairly unified once Al Gore becomes the Democratic nominee, if that would happen, or even if Bill Bradley did. Well, that might pose a slightly different problem for the McCain people. But if it ends up Bush and Gore, I mean, with the exception of the Reform Party, which is really a wild card again in all this, I think that fracturing of the party may come back together.
Sure.
Because they will have a common enemy then.
Sure.
It's called the Hillary effect.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Although we saw, at least in our poll, that much deeper dislike of Gore among the Bush voters than we see among the McCain voters.
Well, because the Bush
And
people are
that's
hardcore
clearly-
Republicans.
Yeah.
And that's clearly an interesting thing in terms of if Bush gets to be the nominee, what will happen in November.
Okay.
Yeah, well, and I might just throw one thing. One of the questions we asked that I find fascinating, the answers to, we do this for Democrats and Republicans as well. We just scale people on a scale of 1 to 10 on Democratic weak strong, Republican weak strong, and you just see the differences between the Bush as you get up in the higher numbers of Republican. I mean, that's where his people are. Same thing with Gore. The 1, 2, 3, 4s, and 5s are the McCain Republicans and the Bradley Democrats. I mean, it's sort of a nice academic little exercise, but when you get to, but of course the turnout is likely to occur at the higher numbers too.
Sure.
So yeah, do you want to wade in on the Democrats, because we probably can do that quickly?
Uh,
I don't know.
Yes,
Or are there some?
let's open it up for questions. Stanley Michaels?
Yeah, I was wondering whether, nobody's mentioned.
To whom?
Anyway.
Okay.
Whether there's any fallout of the attempt to lock McCain out of the Republican primary.
We polled it, and God, I'm trying to remember what we found. People said this is a real big deal, but whether or not it'll be reflected in, they didn't seem to be any, if you ask them, hey, is this a bad thing? Oh, yeah, it's a terrible thing. But as far as, it doesn't mean
Pataki
anything.
cut his losses and
Right.
opened it up to the
And-
degree that it's now open,
And they
that-
forgot about it,
Yeah.
and they
It's old
moved
news.
on.
And New York is accustomed to that stuff, Stan. I mean, but I know, I had a Japanese television crew come in. So I said, probably Japan thinks that New York is a bit peculiar. I said, but New Jersey and Connecticut think New York is a bit peculiar.
I think Jersey and Connecticut are peculiar.
Definitely.
Jerry?
Yeah, I was just wondering, where is McCain's vote coming from? Because historically, wouldn't the Republicans' voting be tied either to the organization or ideological conservatives, and wouldn't that be Bush?
I think that's,
McCain's base are liberal and moderate Republicans.
right.
And he does better among men, in part because of the veteran thing.
Yeah.
but
He does much better among older voters also, who like McCain a lot better.
Like to have turned out in the past?
No, I think what's happening, yeah, to a certain extent, but I think what's happening is that the McCain-Bush race is transcending, in a sense, ideology and issues, and it's really based on personality and, if you will, charisma and the expectation of shaking up the system. And what you've got is you've got this tremendous increase in the number of participants in the Republican primaries. The turnout has been extraordinarily higher, and a lot of them are new voters. And when you look at their campaign contributions, particularly their internet campaign contributions, a huge proportion of it comes from first-timers. So what McCain is doing is he's bringing in first-time voters and previously alienated voters, and in a sense, as I said earlier, it transcends issues and ideology. That's why the McCain campaign is so fascinating to me as an academic. It's different.
But it was a stroke of genius on the Bush side when they went in with, they're stealing our party right out from under us,
Right.
because that then created the turnout among mainstream Republicans.
In Virginia, certainly.
Which is why the Democratic primary doesn't have any of this, and there's going to be 11 Democrats are going to show up, and Gore will get 9, and Bradley will get 2.
And what happened to the other one? It was undecided.
Keys.
Dennis Duggan, and then Barbara Fife, I'm sorry.
Lee, when you did your poll, you got pushed down moving ahead of McCain.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
but at least from Mickey's point of view.
Yes.
In that
From
direction.
7 to +1.
Yeah, sure.
Were there any questions that indicated why, was that the business of attacking the Christian right, naming Falwell and Robertson? Did you bring that question up?
We didn't ask that specifically, but what was really interesting was from the beginning of this week to the end of this week, there was a decided movement among people who felt that, which candidate was spending too much time on religion and politics. And originally that was all Bush's. White Catholics were 2-1, said Bush is, pushing this one too much. And then by Wednesday night, it was all was different.
The jaws.
He should just, McCain should have done, McCain should just let the story tell itself after a certain point.
Right,
I mean,
he didn't need that extra time.
he somewhat was reminiscent. McCain acted somewhat like the mayor of the city. Sometimes you just let the
Right.
story tell itself.
Right.
You don't have to fly the Arkansas flag above the city hall. We know she's a carpetbagger.
That's right, that's right, that's right. Barbara?
I was going to ask if there are any issues that really drive chunks of voters here, choice or campaign finance reform, or is it sort of all who do you like?
I don't think anything's
think so.
there are issues, but they're not driving the election. When you look at, for example, in the previous exit poll, cutting taxes versus Social Security, surprisingly enough, only 51% of Republicans like tax cutting at all, and in fact, most prefer to deal with Social Security than with a tax cut. So the traditional Republican calling cry issue that Bush was focusing on in New Hampshire is dead. It doesn't apply.
There is some difference between the two candidates on
go
this,
ahead.
in that the McCain voters are far more driven by the character issue
Yes.
than they are by, and by his biography than they really are by
Sure.
the issues. Whereas the Bush voters at least say they're backing him because of his stance on the issues.
And Barbara, in New Hampshire, did you guys poll New Hampshire either? No. Okay, we found in New Hampshire there was a big, correlation between people who thought campaign finance reform, whatever that is, was important, and the McCain vote. But that sort of drifted since.
But
Well, he
here's
hasn't
the
been
point. No, it
talking
didn't
about
drift.
it.
They stopped it.
He's not
Right,
talking about it.
it's
The
gone.
Apollo debate, let me work
Go ahead,
Democrats through this
sure.
too. The Apollo
Okay,
debate in New York.
we'll move into the Go ahead.
That's great.
I mean,
And
Bill
we'll
Bradley
open it up
did
again.
not say campaign finance reform once in that
No.
debate. McCain did exactly the same thing after New Hampshire. They both went campaign textbook 101, and they said, okay, now I gotta go for rock rib Democrats, that's Bradley, and McCain said, now I gotta go for conservative Reagan Republicans,
And they
and we're
stopped
gonna go
talking
for
about
main,
it.
and they
they stopped
really
talking.
started losing some of their charm, such as it was along the way. And I think McCain has really been very badly advised on this, because, I mean, they're getting too cute, and it hurt us.
Yeah, and also the politics of personal invective has really taken over. I mean, basically, it's who's running the dirtier campaign and who's a bigger bigot, and who's a bigger bigot for calling the other person a bigger bigot. And essentially, that has been the last several debates, and Alan Keyes is the voice of reason,
That's
saying,
right.
let's talk about
Which
issues
is
here.
interesting.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking maybe we should have Sharpton and Falwell actually
That's
run.
exactly right.
And then we don't
That
have
might
to,
be it.
Right.
but do you want me to just start
Go
the
ahead, yeah,
Democratic
go
stuff?
ahead.
All right. Democratic stuff is much less complicated. I mean, we have, all of us are showing 2-to-1, 3-to-1, you know, I mean, someone will hit it on the head probably at, 28 points as a correlate, but,
Are you telling us something?
we're no one's calibrating it. I mean, Bradley's well-liked in New York, they know him, New Yorkers like him, but they're not planning on voting for him. And, initially, when we pulled the turnout numbers, Nikki was talking about the tight screens, way down, up until about a week ago, there was, a third of the margin would evaporate because you'd get some pure Bradley folks in there, and that isn't even happening right now. After Washington, I mean, Bradley goes out west for 5 days, spends money, comes up empty. I mean, I don't know, I always told when, from a New Yorker, right, you go out west, you go to Passaic, right?
No, that's too far west.
That's way west.
That's way west.
No, you go to the west
We're talking
side.
The west
Javits
side.
Convention Center.
Yeah, the west,
Go to
going west is
Javits,
taking
Javits.
crosstown bus, that's going
it.
west.
Come on.
Beyond that, he went too far.
Beyond 34.
So I don't have anything else to say about Bradley.
Well, in terms of,
Oh,
I mean,
maybe.
if I might, about the Democrats, Bradley had 3 major opponents in this election and lost to all 3. He had himself, and I think he lost. He had McCain, who we didn't expect, and he
Right.
lost. And
Shook
thirdly,
the guy's hand in New Hampshire,
Yeah.
said, voters, my guys, if you don't like me, go for him.
Right.
I mean,
And
now,
whoops.
I don't, didn't
and
mean it.
thirdly, he lost to Gore. So on 3 counts, he lost to his 3 major opponents.
Yeah.
And as I said, the big surprise was that 6 months ago, if there were to be an insurgent candidacy, it would have been Bradley's insurgent
Sure,
candidacy.
Gore was a much better target.
And Gore was a much better target. Bush, we were going to coronate, and on the way to the coronary,
Coronary.
on the way to the coronation,
There
Bush
it
had a
is.
coronary. So let me break that down.
Write that, it works, it works.
And
Well,
in a sense, Bradley sold his soul, if you will, after New Hampshire. Instead of,
yeah.
he was almost shocked that politics was all elbows and overhand rights, and he should have known that. By not responding to Bush on the attacks on the issues in Iowa and New Hampshire, he then tried a little product differentiation where he went after Gore ad hominem and started calling him a liar, in a sense,
and I think
sold
that-
his soul, and in combination with his aloofness and his heart condition, I think it shriveled a little bit.
Yeah.
It shriveled
Yeah.
a
Oh,
little
absolutely.
bit. He sounded a little bit like an old man scolded with, a little bit of a
Well,
heart
I think
condition.
McCain did everything
Oh, well,
that
McCain beat
first
him.
of all, that Bradley was hoping to do,
Right.
needed to do, didn't do, couldn't do,
And
and he
McCain's been
stole all his thunder.
And McCain said early on in this barroom brawl with Bush that I'm not Bill Bradley. He said it. I'm not Bill Bradley. I'm not going to take it. We're going to hit back. Now, I think his
He got-
Christian right remark
He may have gone too far,
was,
too.
it's been played as a strategic mistake, and it may be a strategic mistake, both in Virginia and in the rest of the South, not only in the South, it may be California as well. I think it was less a conscious strategic act, and McCain was angry. He was angry that he had been viciously attacked in South Carolina, and he reacted on the basis of the anger. In some sense, I'm talking now as an individual. I was really taken aback by McCain's behavior, not because I necessarily didn't agree with the substance of it, but the way he did it. It wasn't strategic. I think it was personal. He felt stung that they would stoop that low and then character assassinate Rudman and himself, and he reacted viscerally.
No,
But
Bradley
to use
Bradley
the phrase
reacted the
forces
same
of
way.
evil.
Bradley thought he looked personal. They're attacking my health care plan.
Right,
Yeah.
And,
right.
and then he got into attacks that didn't make any sense. I mean,
Well, I
his
think
attacks
who's
on
he?
Gore.
Bradley-
Oh, Bradley.
Bradley
I'm sorry.
screwed up to a large
Yes.
extent, but Bradley was also a victim, and not
Of
so.
McCain.
Yeah.
Well, he was a victim of McCain, but remember Lyndon Johnson's line about Gerald Ford that he
About
couldn't
chewing
walk,
gum?
couldn't walk and chew gum at the same
Right,
time?
yes.
The Washington Press, Dennis,
They couldn't
you're not
deal
from
with
Washington.
they couldn't deal
Joe,
with two.
I mean, the fact is the press apparently could only concentrate on one thing at once.
Right.
And so Bradley, gee, that was an interesting guy. Now we'll turn to our new flavor of the day. And McCain,
Right.
Was a better flavor.
ate him alive.
Yeah,
McCain was on
after New
page
Hampshire,
one.
Right, but see, I thought, and we were up in New Hampshire, and I thought Bradley misread that terribly. You know, in some ways, we're now seeing what happens when a guy who's pure goes on the attack
Yeah.
to McCain. And I thought Bradley was under an awful lot of criticism that he wasn't defending himself and going on
Yeah,
the
yeah,
attack.
yeah.
So he came out of Iowa. There was a bounce for, I almost said Dukakis. The other one, Gore. Well, we're doing history here. Yeah. There was a bounce for Gore, and then Bradley went up with his attack ads, and he saw the numbers come down a little bit, which may have just been the bounce coming back down a little bit, nothing shot. And they said, boy, and then they came out in New Hampshire just a little short, and they really went on the attack.
Right.
And I think by the end, there was nothing left of him.
Right.
But
right. And he lost his
I mean,
message.
I actually thought he might have won the New Hampshire primary. The ads he had initially
Yeah.
up there, I thought were very
See.
soft, fuzzy, and positive.
Yeah,
And then I thought they blew themselves out of the
Right,
water.
I thought so too. I think he lost his whole message. I mean, whatever it was that he was trying to use to appeal
Yeah, but
to
hey, Mickey, you know,
people, I think
don't, there's two guys in this. The
Yes.
other one is
Yes.
Gore.
Yes. That's
And
true, too.
Gore has turned out to be
Well, this is-
one
He woke up.
tough
Okay.
guy. I mean, now, the abortion rights thing, those folks coming out for Gore, there's no reason in the world why an abortion rights group should pick Gore over Bradley, or Bradley over Gore. They're both, but Gore, I don't know who did it. Somebody told me that he heard Clinton did it himself. But whatever it was, what Gore clearly did was say to anybody, you better be with me now. I want you, and I insist on you being there.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so, you know, and sure, yeah, Bradley screwed up. Yeah, the
I
press
think you're
did him
exactly
in.
right. No,
But
no.
further on, Gore turned out to be not just this
That's right.
sweet
I
little
think-
guy from Tennessee. He's a tough guy.
Oh, I think Mickey's exactly right. And, if you,
absolutely, man.
and when the history of this, on both sides, Bush and Gore are written, when those books are written, I think we're going to learn a little bit about technology and campaign politics and strategy.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Al Gore and George Bush shed their skin 6 times in this campaign. They all, the last month, every time Bush does anything wrong, they retreat to
Right.
Austin. They come out now.
And there's a new Bush.
No compassionate conservative. Now I'm a reformer.
Reformer
Result.
result.
Well, that's
Well,
gone.
no, wait, he's the compassionate conservative
No, he's
again.
because he's in the
back.
north.
He's back.
back.
He's up
He's back.
here,
Just
he's
when you
got to be
thought he was safe.
compassionate again. So.
Bill Bradley ran a very successful campaign for about 1956. I mean, no polling internally. I mean, Gore was picking him apart. It was like a prize
Right.
fight.
Yep.
And you can't spend $25 million on ads and not measure the audience you're trying to reach
Right.
and how you're trying to reach. I mean, you know, you like Clinton, you hate him. I mean, they're great at this stuff. And Gore obviously picked up. It didn't look like in the summer that Gore had the right formula, but he
he does
sure
now.
picked it up in the fall.
Well,
and
Also, when you said something about going west and that he shouldn't, I mean, the whole idea of going out to Washington
You
when he
gotta
really
know.
should have been here, when he spent his time in Iowa, when he really needed to be in New Hampshire. I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of those kind of
Bradley
tactical-
played rope-a-dope, but he wasn't a Muhammad Ali. I mean, he took the shots and he went down rather than...
But you got to measure it. You have to know what you're doing. You got to protect your investment. So that's the end of Bill Bradley.
No, I
Yeah,
think so. I think it's seriously over.
Bradley upset
Seriously
Al
over.
Gore, shaking up the political universe
Right.
today.
I think that's probably the only one we've
Okay,
been
you want to go back to the floor, Brian?
I want to know how pivotal New York is to McCain's future. If he loses New York, is he done?
I think he's cooked. I mean, if the polls are right in California that he loses
He's gonna
that
lose
winner
that.
take all, if he doesn't win a substantial portion of, win the national, the statewide beauty contest, the real vote,
Yeah.
statewide, and if he doesn't have a substantial number of delegates, I think he's done.
Yeah, but suppose he wins this, California's winner
yeah,
take
right.
all. Suppose
Exactly.
he wins the primary and loses
Oh,
all
well,
delegates.
that,
Which is quite possible.
I'm going to get
But
into
he
that.
could, right, but that could create a whole floor fight. I mean, but he still has to
He
win
won't have the
something.
delegates.
He's going to have to win this. I mean, I
He's
think he is
gotta
going to
win.
have to. He has to win something large, and he's going to have to win.
He may win the
He's
poll.
gonna have
I'm
to-
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm for interrupting, stepping all over you.
You're a tiger.
Yeah.
We heard that
I'm
earlier.
sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize.
I expect that from
I'm
a
from
tiger.
Brooklyn.
Big mouth.
I'm of the Rudy generation, and the Rudy neighborhood, in fact. Where was I?
I don't know. You were interrupting. You know where you were.
Go ahead.
We're talking, but
No, it's crucial. I think the polling shows that he's got a shot in New England and all the New England states. All the
Yes.
polling
I think
indicates that he's
ahead.
he'll win
He's ahead in a lot.
Massachusetts.
or Connecticut looks reasonable,
Connecticut's
Maine looks
Skygrove.
okay. He could, it's conceivable that he could lose New York, California, and Ohio, and do
still
well in the rest of the New England state,
Right.
but he's dead.
But
in
he's,
terms of the
there's not enough
delegate count.
delegates in New England.
Right.
So he has to get some big states. And if he's not going to get the California delegates, he really has to get New York, because God knows that next week after that, he's not getting Texas and Florida.
No, he goes into the south
So,
in the, and
you know,
then
what
the-
other big, you know, I mean, he's only got, there are only so many
the
big
Christian
states,
conservatives
and,
bury
you know,
him
and-
on the
right.
14th.
So,
I think the election's over on the Ides of March, March 15th.
Right.
The general election begins between George Bush and Al Gore, and we can go back to sleep.
If
And
it
Jess-
doesn't
and
end
Jesse
sooner.
Ventura. I mean, that's what's
Frankly,
gonna
happen. Right.
frankly, if McCain gets
That's what's gonna
wiped out
happen.
this week, it ends this
Yeah,
week.
Of course
yeah,
that's-
but he may go on. I
But
mean, yeah,
if he
gets
does,
blown out.
well this week, then he holds on, you know,
Right.
then he has a
If he
fight.
wins New York
If
and
he
does
wins New
well
York and
elsewhere.
wins the popular vote in California, or,
well,
or
that's
does
the
well
problem.
enough, or does
California's
well
crazy.
enough in New
He lose-
England,
but he loses the
and New
nomination.
York,
He loses the
you know,
nomination.
then there's some kind of a fight.
Oh.
Aha, well, here's the division you were
I don't,
talking
I
about.
mean, I have no idea. McCain said that he would not.
He said he wouldn't do it.
And Bradley's indicated that he would not. A McCain-Bradley ticket.
McCain Bradley.
Listen, yeah, a McCain-Bradley
Bradley
reform ticket, which they both said they wouldn't do,
Independent ticket.
would be, I mean, from an academic's point of view, this is what I want. 1912, you know, Teddy
That's
Roosevelt. This would be
Yeah, look
fascinating.
what happened to
but
Teddy
forget-
Roosevelt.
Well, he beat Taft.
Yeah, but he lost.
I'd understand.
All bets are off if that happens.
Yeah, but history, you have to get in my way. Brian, are you finished with the fight?
Well, I just wanted to know if he needs an outright winner, if he can win enough delegates to.
I think he needs the
He can
I think
continue
he-
if he wants to continue.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I
Alan
think he
Keyes is still
can.
running.
He
But I
can,
mean,
but
you
he-
just run out of delegates. I mean, in New
Right.
Hampshire, we calibrate it by the 10th of the percentiles, you know? I mean, it's like, you know, who gets 26.1 to 20. Now we're into winning
Yeah,
and
he
delegates.
just-
The whole
Yeah.
thing shifts.
Right,
Yeah.
so he really needs to win a big state, because he needs the delegates. So he
And he
needs
needs
to
to
win,
right.
he needs to win New York, because he's not going to win the delegates in
But
California.
even if he wins New York, if you can figure out who wins and
Right.
doesn't, the delegates are going to be split pretty evenly.
Because
Because it's-
Or he
31
needs to win
elections.
enough delegates in New York, let's put it that way.
And then he loses California. I mean, it's just awful for him.
Yes, because it's district by district here, so it's.
But
Yeah,
clearly,
that's
we're
right.
hoping
That's
for the Mickey Carroll scenario, which is that he wins the beauty contest in California.
Right.
If he loses the Republican primary, which is the
Right.
real delegate selection primary.
And then you have the
You don't
possibility
do
of
well,
floor
Then
fight.
you have a
You have,
mess.
well, then you have a mess in the
No,
Republican
you don't have enough people on the floor to fight for
Yeah,
you.
no.
But you know what, if you want to win the California
said
primary,
no
then you stay in California for the debate and the
Right,
primary. You don't
right.
do it from, you know, that silly thing on the table there.
I know.
You know, the high-tech version.
But, and there's some question, I think that, I mean, it's interesting, because there has been so much focus on California really as sort of the kingmaker in this election, and not really on New York, and there haven't been debates here, and you know, it hasn't, except, I mean, there was on the Democratic side where it isn't even gonna matter. And it really, you know, it hasn't been here, and we don't even, and therefore we don't even know, A, if there's going to be a big turnout here, or whether, in fact, you know, this really will be the pivotal state.
Yeah. Barbara?
Every 4 years, the two-party organizations tinker with the primary schedule to produce what they think are some results that they have in mind. Do you think that this primary schedule this year, which was quite front-loaded in comparison with what we've had, which was very different for the Democrats and for the Republicans in terms of this whole sort of month, do you think that it has any influence on the results, or nothing at all?
Oh, well, that's really my feeling is, and let me not answer the question you asked, but the corollary to your question, your follow-up. I think moving the New York primary up was brilliant for New York in terms of its ability to impact on the election. It's not quite the way that the Republican establishment had figured it, because New York was going to be part of this glorious coronation for Bush. Didn't turn out that way, but in fact, it has made New York State a pivotal actor for the first time in more than a generation.
Forever.
Oh, I can't speak forever. You can
Ever.
speak forever, Nick.
Ever.
I'm a little younger.
When did New York have a?
I can't remember.
I guess I was Dewey Days
Well,
or something like that. I don't know.
Well, you're not old
I
enough
don't
for
know.
Dewey either.
Was it,
One thing that seems to be accomplished in the turmoil in other states, which is very unusual for a New York primary, I don't hear of any dirty tricks being pulled. In other words, nobody's calling up saying McCain fathered an illegitimate child. I haven't gotten any literature which is malicious, and that is very unusual for New York.
That's an excellent point. But it hasn't been. The only real negativity that's been overt is the claims about the advertising, yesterday's advertising, and that's not, and in my mind, that's not negative campaigning. That's just issue campaigning. I agree.
But if you have 14 primaries or whatever it is going on the same day, I mean, we aren't really getting that real New York, baking in the spotlight look that we've had in the, we're getting a couple days now, and then off they go to California.
Right.
But you're right. I think that is a distinguishing characteristic here. It hasn't been that
It
negative.
hasn't been as ugly as it's.
Can I just
Go,
to
sure.
Barbara? One of the things I think is I mean, I think the parties are going to think about this open-close primary thing.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that was a little wild on the Republican side. They had Democrat. I mean, the whole thing got a little out of control.
Yeah, they wanted the Reagan Dems, and they got
All kinds of
And
people.
they got
They
people
got
they didn't.
Stan.
Given the Gore-Bush scenario,
Okay,
where do
Chair.
the McCain votes go in the general election?
I'm sorry?
Given the Gore-Bush
If it's
scenario,
where is
where do the McCain votes go in the general election?
Rossborough.
I think they go primarily to Bush, but they may drift off to other places. They may drift off, some to Gore, some to the Reform Party, depending on who their candidate. If it's Buchanan, I don't know, but.
Stan, it's that is a very good question, and I don't think anybody knows the answer.
Nobody does.
So a lot of them are going to stay home, I think.
Right. Although
But
Al
that
Gore.
is something.
Don't forget Al Gore. They don't like Al
But
Gore.
that's something we'll all be looking at. I think, well, we will anyway.
Right,
yeah.
I'll tell you, looking at the vote, sort of the
You're right.
flip side,
You're right.
looking at how many of the registered Republicans and the Republican likely voters now did not vote for Dole in the last election.
Right.
I was sort of surprised to see that it was as large as it was. It was about 30. It was like maybe 20, 21, 20-something% that had voted for Clinton, and another 8 or 9 or something that had voted Perot or whatever. So there was already this like 30% or something of them who had not voted for Dole the last time, and is that the group that Gore really clearly would have a very good chance with? That group is going McCain now, and that's the group that clearly could go either way, and we shall see.